Tongue piercings, pros, cons, advantages, disadvantages. We're also going to talk about what you should know beforehand, getting the piercing, healing it, jewelry, living with the piercing, and what happens if you decide you don't want it anymore and decide to abandon it. Coming up next on Pros and Cons by a Piercer, Season 2, Episode number 21. So you should probably stick around. For those who are new to the channel, first off, welcome to the channel. I hope you're enjoying the videos. I hope you're finding them informative and useful. But you may not know exactly who I am. My name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio, located right here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So, when I talk to you about these things, I'm talking about a level of expertise that comes from me in the body piercing industry for well over 27 years. So, today we're going to talk about tongue piercings. Probably one of the more popular oral piercings, or at least was one of the more popular ones. It kind of goes through periods where it becomes very popular and then kind of fades away, and then becomes very popular and fades away. The tongue piercing is done up and down. What we're talking about is midline, what they're often referred to, straight up and down between the two muscles, and that space that's between them that's often referred to as a septum. Just in front of the florineum tendon, which is that tendon that's on the underside of your tongue, pretty much perpendicular to the tongue. Now, this piercing has a long history with modern body piercing, but there's examples of it in ancient cultures and prehistoric cultures, or sort of prehistoric cultures. The Aztecs and Mayans both pierced their tongues, ran rope through it, and used it in religious ceremonies. Also, it was often done by Asian Also, it was done by Asian spiritual mediums as a way of making atonement, and also as a way of proving they were in a trance-like state. Lastly, as far as like Western, probably the most common thing that people piercing their tongues was during sideshows, usually done by a Blockhead or possibly a geek. They would run a nail or sharp needle through their tongue. All of these were not a permanent tongue piercing. They were more of a temporary kind of thing. The modern version, what we commonly refer to as a tongue piercing, where it's more permanent, came about in the 1980s, was developed at the Gauntlet in Los Angeles. First appeared in Piercing Fans Quarterly International, issue number 18 in about 1983. It's been with us and pretty much the standard of the body piercing industry ever since. So now with that out of the way, let's move on to the pros and the cons. Starting with the pros, the advantages, things we like about this piercing, things that make you go, yeah, I want this. Pros, advantages. Starting with number one, this is one of the fastest healing piercings you can get done, usually healing out anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. Unlike a lot of other piercings, we're looking at months and months of healing. With tongue piercings, you generate tissue very rapidly, and they tend to heal very quickly. Number two, this is a well-established, well-done, often done, established piercing. This is not a piercing that's experimental. This is not a piercing that's new. It more than likely will heal easily and without little issue other than all the complications that are involved with healing out a tongue piercing. But for the most part, it's probably going to heal and you're not going to have a lot of issues. Number three. There was a lot of misconception about this piercing, making you like a superstar in certain activities and generally in the bedroom. If you have the skill, it might add a little bit of an edge, but the reality is if you don't have the skill, you're not going to get any better because you have a tongue piercing. However, it does make kissing, I think, a little bit more interesting and other activities a little bit more interesting. So this piercing makes things more interesting. Number four, this piercing can be hidden fairly easily. Usually, unless a person is extremely taller than you or extremely shorter than you, they will not even notice that you have this piercing unless you play with it constantly or talk with your mouth wide open or chew with it wide open. Now, number five. Number five, it doesn't affect lifestyle as much as other piercings. This piercing doesn't tend to be a job stopper. It doesn't tend to be something you can't sleep on, something that's going to keep you from doing various different activities, wearing helmets, headgear, worrying about your clothing, etc. This piercing is pretty much only mouth-oriented and tends to not interrupt things as much. Before we move on to the cons, if you like this video, find it educational, find it informative, please hit that like button. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you're notified every single time we post something. Now it's time for the cons and disadvantages, the things we don't like, the things that make you go, not going to do it. Not this time. Number one, damage to teeth, gums, and the bone structure of your mouth. You have a metal object. It's in your mouth. There's soft tissue around it in things like teeth. There's always a possibility, even after you've had the piercing for a number of years, to cause damage and create dental problems. Number two, affects eating and speech. This is primarily during the healing process, but there's an adaptation where you're going to have sometimes a lisp, and that can be from the swelling. Also, it's going to make eating very difficult at first until you get used to it. It does impair your ability to eat various different foods, so there's that. Now, granted, that's temporary. It usually doesn't last a long time. However, even after the piercing is healed, you kind of have to be cautious and aware of it being there because it is easy for it to kind of slip to the side and get bit on. Number three, it closes pretty darn rapidly. This piercing, it's not uncommon to have it for 5-10 years, take it out for a couple hours for whatever reason and have problems getting it back in. This is a piercing where you want to leave the jewelry in at all times. Number four, during the healing process, primarily you're going to deal with swelling. Sometimes it'll swell up to 2-3 times its normal size, or at least feel like it. You're going to have a change in diet. You're going to have to cut out things that may agitate the piercing. It's temporary, usually only lasting about the first week, but it's definitely going to change your diet for a little while, and it's going to be a big change in your life for that healing period. So it does have its disadvantage. After it heals, usually you can eat pretty much whatever you want, and it won't swell up again. Number five, the ends unscrewing. Yes, it's common. Even years after you've had the piercing in there, one of those days you don't check it, or you don't check it for about a week. You're eating your favorite food, and in the middle of chewing it up, you notice a metal object, and the next thing you know, you're swallowing a ball or a post or what have you. You have to check. You have to be diligent about that, and it is always a possibility. In most cases, it'll pass through your system pretty easily. However, it's not the best thing to go through your lower intestines. There is always a possibility that it could get lodged somewhere. So, check the tightness of the balls. It just becomes a part of your life. Now with the pros and cons out of the way, before we move on to things you should know beforehand or how to prepare, if you like merch, you like t-shirts, you like swag, you like things like what I'm wearing right now, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. There's also one of those merch bars down below. Now, things you should consider, know, or do to prepare for this particular piercing. First one is you want to find a piercer that's experienced, knowledgeable, willing to share information, and makes you feel comfortable, and is willing to openly share risks, aftercare information, the piercing procedure, etc. They should be willing to do that without being asked, and they should be very open and passionate about what they do. Also, they should give you a consultation that's going to include things like the risk involved with the piercing, what you're going to need to do for aftercare, diet changes, cross-contamination prevention. Also talk to you about any medical conditions you may have, or if you're on any medication or controlled substance that may cause issues. The last thing is they should check your anatomy. This piercing cannot be done on everyone. You really need to have the right anatomy for this particular piercing, because if you don't, it's going to cause a lot of damage to your gums, teeth, and bones. What we want to do is position this right in front of that floronium tendon that's on the underside of your tongue. In some cases, with some people, it goes all the way to the tip, often referred to as being tongue-tied. These cannot be pierced. It just would cause a load of problems and issues. And your piercer should evaluate this right off the bat and decide whether or not you can get it pierced or not. Now, I know there's a lot of things people tell people over the years, legends and urban legends and wives' tales and etc. Like things like, if you pierce your tongue in the wrong spot, you'll become paralyzed. No, that can't happen. The other one being is that there's a large vein in the middle of your tongue. It's not a vein, it's a tendon. That's what we're concerned about. It's a tendon. That space right there between the two muscles, there's not really a lot in there. Yes, there's some blood vessels, but there's not giant veins in there. And what you're looking at, that white thing on the underside of your tongue, is in fact a tendon, a floronium tendon, designed to keep things in place and make them snap back to where they need to be. It makes the work that your muscles do a little easier. Your tongue has two separate muscles that kind of flip-flop back and forth, and we want to get between the two of them. Now, piercing into the muscle is an entirely different subject, and I'll probably talk about that when I cover venom piercings, just to let you know. You should understand, of course, and I've said this time and time again, the risks that are involved with this particular piercing and having this particular piercing, especially your teeth, gums, and etc. If you feel that the piercing's worth that risk, then go ahead and get it done. If you don't, there's no real way to eliminate this other than proper placement, proper jewelry size. And even then, sometimes it will cause issues. So you need to be prepared that if it doesn't work out, that you're going to abandon this piercing and let it close. Now, you should understand that with an oral piercing, you are more acceptable to STDs during oral sex, meaning if you switch partners, you are always going to need to practice safe sex before you've both been tested. This doesn't change because you've had it for 30 years. It's just a fact of having a metal object in your mouth. Now, you should discuss changes in diet that you may have to do, what you need to cut back on, what you can eat, what you don't want to eat, all that fun stuff involved with healing out an oral piercing, especially a tongue piercing. A couple things more. First off, you should ask your piercer, and this is more about the preparation, ask them if they provide aftercare product or what products they suggest and where you can purchase them. The other thing is go out beforehand, have a nice meal, because you're not going to be able to eat things that are solid for a while, so you might as well have that last favorite meal, go to your favorite restaurant, what have you, maybe an hour or so before going in to get pierced. One final thing is it's a good idea that especially if you work in a industry where you talk a lot, to do this on the Friday at the beginning of a 3-day weekend to give you plenty of time to rest and recover before you have to talk all day. Talking, moving, and interacting is going to just increase the length of the pierce or the swelling and prolong it. So try to get it done when you have a break. Now let's move on to the piercing experience. With this piercing, usually we go through a consultation. I've already told you what we discussed during that. The tongue is evaluated to see if it can be done at all, if it's safe to pierce it. Then we will pick out a jewelry size that's appropriate for that particular person's tongue. Now, when we pierce initially, we're going to pierce with an oversized piece because of the swelling. We do this on purpose. It's going to be more uncomfortable and have more contact with teeth, gums, and etc. So don't be surprised if the tongue barbell is super long. That's what we want, because we would much rather have it swell almost to the length of that than swell over the length of it, because that doesn't feel comfortable, to say the least. Now, they'll usually go through a waiver. The waiver will cover things like releasing them to do the piercing, any type of medical issues you may have, any allergic reactions you may have to anything that they are using, jewelry, etc. Also, when they ask you about jewelry or start picking that out, they'll probably generally ask you if you have any metal allergies. Be honest about it. Most piercers anymore, they stock pretty much just titanium, and it's extremely rare that you would have a reaction to it. But if you are aware that you're allergic to titanium, you might want to tell them before the piercing proceeds. Now the piercer will set up the area, lay out all his tools, unwrap them, do all that stuff. Usually I'll have someone rinse with Biotin antiseptic mouthwash before we do it, just to give it a kind of disinfect the area. Then we will mark it. Usually marking it will involve the person bringing their tongue out as far as they possibly can and then flipping up the tip of it like they're trying to touch the tip of their nose. The reason why we do this is that will mark or kind of give us an idea of where that tendon connects on the bottom and where that tongue is free at the very end. We'll mark directly in front of that, dead center on the top and on the bottom. This piercing doesn't need to be marked on both sides. It's usually best. Now, the angle of the piercing will be slightly back, but it'll be at a 90-degree angle to that curvature the tongue has. This is, in my experience, makes it fit better into the mouth and flow more natural with the tongue. You don't want super sharp angles with tongue piercings because it's going to put a lot of pressure on the underside of your mouth, especially your lower gums. With the piercing mark, the next thing is usually this piercing is done sitting up. The next part is clamping it. I use Foster forceps or sponge forceps. They are a bit longer than the surface area is a little bit longer than it is with Pennington's. It's much larger, has a little bit more grip, and it's designed to compress the tissue, but also just hold it in place. The hardest part about getting your tongue pierced, in my opinion, is not the pain, it's not the anticipation, it's keeping your damn tongue out of your mouth. Your tongue is just not designed to stick out of your mouth for a long period of time. Now, don't be surprised if you start drooling. It's just a part in nature of this particular piercing. You're going to have your tongue out of your mouth longer than you normally would, and those saliva glands will start pumping. So just deal with it. Let it fall. Usually they will give you a drool rag or at least have a dental bib on so that you don't mess up your clothes. Piercing's done from the top downward, usually with the barbell attached to it, so it's one motion, usually pierce and then jewelry insertion. Needle's taken off. Guide pin is removed. Jewelry is threaded, the ball on the very end. They'll take the forceps off. Now, this is one of the few piercings that I think it might be the only piercing I do with the forceps left on during the whole procedure. The reason being is it avoids that possibility of you drawing your tongue back into your mouth and swallowing the jewelry or having it flip back into the back of your throat or what have you. So just as a precaution, we want to make sure that you, if you can't keep your tongue out, that you, have a little bit of help from us. Usually we'll take the forceps off and then double check how tight it is. Another thing on that whole saliva drooling thing is you cannot swallow with your tongue out of your mouth. So don't try to, just let it flow. It's the chance to drool all over everything. And we're used to it. It's normal and we expect it and prepare for it. Immediately after, you may have a little bit of throbbing pain, aching pain that usually lasts a few minutes. Redness, discolorization, of course, is normal. A little bit of heat. Usually some people will experience some tightness in the jaw area down into the neck. And this is caused by keeping your tongue out of your mouth for so long. Your muscles are just not used to it. It'll fade over time, but that is a common reaction. You might see a little bit of slight bleeding. Usually it lasts a few minutes, and it always looks like a lot more in your mouth than it does in other parts of the body, mainly because it's all diluted. Now, when you rinse, which is usually something I have you do, everything's going to come out in these long strings. It takes a little while to get back that projection, that part of spitting. So use a paper towel to wipe it off and cut it off. Also, like I said earlier, don't be surprised if there's a little bit of blood in there. It doesn't mean you're bleeding profusely. What it means is you bled a little bit, and then you rinsed, and it mixed with your saliva in the mouthwash. So it thinned out, so it looks like there's a lot more of it. Of course, the piercing is going to be sensitive to the touch. It's going to be sensitive to the movement. It's not uncommon to have kind of an odd feeling of having that in your mouth, almost like somebody has trapped your tongue. All of this will go away over time. You just need to be patient, deal with it for the time being, try not to talk a lot, And we'll get on to the healing next. But there's a few other things I need to tell you. Sometimes the clamps are put on too tight. You'll see some bruising on the tongue. That's normal. Okay, let's move on to healing. Average healing time on this is roughly about 2 to 4 weeks. It varies from person to person. Most people, right around 2 weeks, you're okay. During that time, I generally suggest rinsing a couple times a day with a alcohol-free antiseptic mouthwash. Most common or easy to find, in my opinion, is Biotine. It also helps a little bit with dry mouth that some people have with oral piercing. I would also suggest rinsing with saline or salt water a couple times a day. Usually warm water in about 1/8 of a teaspoon per cup of warm water is about right. It's best to use sea salt, in my opinion. Rinse with it. Just rinse for a little bit, spit. Rinse for a little bit, spit. Rinse for a little bit, spit. And if it feels good to do it for twice a day, 4 times a day may feel better. Just don't overdo it. If it gets to the point where it doesn't feel good and it hurts, don't do it. Now, you must practice cross-contamination prevention. Common sense things like washing your hands before you handle the jewelry, no oral contact, mouth kissing, or sexual contact. And I really would suggest not doing that for 8 weeks just to be on the safe side. Don't share food items or utensils with other people. Make sure that your own utensils are cleaned on a regular basis. Good idea to start with a fresh toothbrush. Don't store it in the bathroom next to the toilet. Put it somewhere else in an airtight container. Also, I wouldn't suggest swimming because your well ingests water. Keep pets away from it. I don't know why pets would be inside your mouth, but yeah, don't do that. Swelling. You're going to see swelling. Swelling is just a part of any oral piercing, but it's more so when it comes to tongue piercings. You want to cut down your intake of tobacco, alcohol, cannabis, hot and spicy foods, things that are extremely warm in temperature, or anything that may agitate your mouth, including vaping. I don't know why everybody thinks it's special and it doesn't do anything. It is going to cause problem. It's going to agitate. More swelling. Agitation, more swelling. Cut down or eliminate. I know a lot of people are like, does that mean I have to quit smoking? Yeah, it'd be best if you did, but most people are not going to. Also, don't get this piercing because you think it's going to make you quit smoking. It isn't. At least try to cut back. Other things you can do to help cut down on the swelling or reduce it: gently suck out an ice chips for the first 24 to 28 hours, drinking lots of cold liquids, especially throughout the night. You're going to see the worst of the swelling the day after the piercing is done, and that's partly because you dehydrate at night. If you get up during the night a couple times and get a glass of water, it's going to help. Eat cold items. It's your excuse to eat as many frozen treats as you like. I know you do. You want to eat those candy or those ice cream bars and popsicles. So those will help. I know you've been told you're not supposed to eat dairy when healing a tongue piercing. There is no scientific proof that it is going to cause any problem at all. It does not cause yeast infections. Prior to what you may believe, there are not live yeast cultures in the milk or ice cream that you consume. Same goes for alcoholic beverages. It is best just not to drink until at least the swelling is down because they will agitate it regardless if it's beer, wine, or hard booze. You just don't. Plus, you're dehydrating your body, which is going to lead to more swelling. So stay away from the alcohol for a while. Cold items, as I mentioned, also baby food, applesauce, smoothies. Yogurt is really good because it keeps your digestive tract healthy. It also cuts down the likelihood of thrush, which is a silly little thing about the no dairy. Thrush is caused by a breakdown of the enzymes of bacteria that live in your mouth, and you get an outgrowth of thrush. Thrush is a fungi that lives in your digestive tract. It is normal. What happens is everything else that normally keeps it at bay, kind of, he has to fight for food sources, suddenly is gone. So it just goes, I'm taking over. And it will coat your tongue with this white carpet-looking substance, or kind of like cottage cheese. That's a good description. It has a distinct odor to it, sometimes a burning, aching, etc. It usually isn't life-threatening, but technically it can move down into your esophagus and be a major problem and would require medical attention. So The way you eliminate the possibility of thrush is don't over-rinse with antiseptics. Don't use extremely harsh antiseptics such as Listerine. Eat 2 to 3 cartons of yogurt a day, and you'll be fine. Another thing with swelling is avoid playing with it. I know it's in your mouth and you want to do it. You really, really want to do it. But the more you play with it, the more swelling you're going to see, the more problems you're going to see, the longer the healing is going to be, and the longer that swelling is going to stick around. If you can get in a situation where you don't have to talk for 3 days, fantastic, because that's going to help with that swelling. Also, sleeping with your head elevated above your heart. If you can sleep that way, that's going to help with the swelling too. Now, once that swelling goes down, you can slowly start to wean yourself onto solid foods. You want to stick with kind of meat and potato kind of things that can be cut up into small pieces, picked up with a fork, and shoved directly back into your molars. Stay away from things that are really complicated at first. It's going to take you a little while to get used to moving things around your mouth like you do naturally with your tongue without catching the barbell. If it takes you an hour and a half to eat a meal, it takes you an hour and a half to eat a meal. It's better than chipping a tooth. Now, during all of this, keep in mind, this is going to get a lot easier. It's going to feel stranger to have that damn thing out than to have it in. It's very frustrating. Once you get adapted to it and you get used to it, you won't even notice it's there. On top of that, if you take it out, it's going to feel very strange to you. Then you downsize to a shorter barbell, and things get a lot easier. Now, downsizing, I suggest doing in a week to 10 days. I know a lot of places will tell you, wait until it's completely healed, at least a month and a half. Don't do that. Don't put yourself through that pain and pressure. If you have to go back to them and lie about the fact that it's been a month and a half to get the jewelry put in, do it. I would suggest, though, that when you change it, especially in a week to 10 days after the piercing is done, you let a professional do it. Don't try to do it at home. It can be a little too complicated, and you can cause a lot more damage, and then suddenly it starts swelling again. A couple of things that are normal with tongue piercings. White ring of tissue forming around the jewelry. That's scar tissue. That's normal. It's opaque or clear in your mouth. White, kind of this nasty-looking yellowish stuff that hangs out the bottom. It looks like snot. That is discharge. Just like every other piercing that you may have, that stuff that hardens and collects on it, in your mouth, it can't harden. It can't collect, so it forms in these strings. I just rinse. It'll be fine. Numbness at the front of my tongue. My tongue is paralyzed. No, it isn't. It's a reaction to the swelling. It should fade once the swelling is completely gone down. Basically, you restrict all that, and you spread out those nerve endings, and that's why it'll appear to be numb. I don't understand why people don't get this. If they've ever had like a major injury anywhere on their body, the exact same thing happened. Now let's move on to jewelry. Jewelry should be made of metal. I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, bioplastic and acrylic and all this other. Here's the problem with it. First off, plastic is just as hard as metal. It's just likely to do as much damage as possible as metal will. The reality is it may give a little less than or a little more likely to crack before metal will, but it's still going to do damage, especially wear damage where it's in contact with your gums. The only metal or material that's really going to let you mess it up and not break teeth, to be honest with you, is solid 18 karat gold or better. It's so soft that it will definitely give before your teeth will. Plastics, everything else, it'll damage it. Sorry. The other problem with plastic is you've got plastic in your mouth, and you're grinding off bits and pieces of it on a daily basis, and you're digesting it. Nobody knows exactly what this stuff a lot of times is made out of, and we have no idea what the long-term effects would be of wearing a plastic ball in your mouth and grinding it down every day for like 30 years. We don't know how that will affect your health, and it's something I really wouldn't suggest taking risks with. Monitor your teeth, monitor your gums, monitor your bone structure. If there's pain, discomfort, soreness, or you see actual erosion or damage, remove the jewelry immediately. The only thing you can do is stop the problem. You can't really fix it. You can't fix it by leaving the jewelry in. So once it starts, take the jewelry out, leave it out. Time's over. You're done. Straight to the penalty box with the tongue piercing. You can't get one. Should leave it be. I like doing this. Of course, the jewelry should be left in at all times. Do not take it out for hours on end. As I mentioned earlier, this piercing does have a tendency to close pretty rapidly. It's just best to leave jewelry in, only taking out to replace. The other thing is jewelry ends should be rounded, soft, no sharp edges. Stay away from shaped objects like skulls and so forth, or spiders. The most common thing I get called on a regular basis, do you have the vibrating tongue jewelry? Dumb. Don't do it. It ain't worth it. It's the battery wears out in 5 seconds, and it's made of plastic, and it's electrical in your mouth. Think about it. It's junk. So smooth ends, always best. Some people find it more comfortable to have a dome-shaped or a flat disc on the bottom, depending on the size of their mouth. That can feel a little bit more comfortable. Talk to your piercer about that, see what your options are, and experiment. Now let's talk about living with the piercing. Well, jewelry should stay in at all times. For the 5th time in this video, monitor teeth, gums, etc. Remove the jewelry if there's a problem. Check the tightness of the balls on a regular basis. Those suckers can come unscrewed at the worst possible times, and then you end up swallowing them. Not good. Plaque can collect on that bottom ball occasionally. You can take the jewelry out, clean it, brush it. Using a denture cleaner sometimes will work too. Sometimes just brushing it while it's in your mouth will get rid of that plaque. Now, lastly, let's talk about abandoning the piercing. If you decide you don't want this and it's during the healing process, you do want to keep an eye on it and monitor it to make sure that it doesn't become infected. Usually it'll start closing up almost immediately. You're really not a lot you need to do. Do monitor it. Just make sure, like any other cut or abrasion you have in your mouth, you want to make sure that it heals correctly without becoming infected. Any signs of infection, I suggest you contact a medical professional as soon as possible. If you had the piercing for a year, it's healed or whatever, and you're just done with it, yeah, take it out. It'll slowly begin to close. People are always worried about food getting trapped in it. I've never seen a case where anything's gotten trapped in them. I could be wrong. Comment, I guess. But yeah, debris sometimes will get in there, but it doesn't like collect in there. It'll slowly begin to close, usually in the center first and then filling outward. May appear open for a long period of time. Usually the scar tissue will be there for a while. Well, that's all I have to say about tongue piercings today. And I'm worn out. How about you? If I missed something or you have something to share, please comment. I usually check them when I can, read them when I can, and answer when I can. Till next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Take care of one another, and enjoy yourself. Watch one of these videos, because I'll see you in the next one.